Wow. Hello, hello, hello. You guys are looking so good. Last Wednesday night I was somewhere else, and they're not nearly as good looking over there as you guys are over here. Actually, they're very nice. I was at the Southwest congregation last Wednesday evening, and they're nice. They're all good and everything, but I'd rather be here with you. Glad to see you. Glad to see you. And I've been out of town a few days, and let me tell you how exciting it was to get out of town. I went out of town with 3 women and 9 children. Barely. Made it back alive barely. Yes. Yes, it was an exciting and extremely restful time, and oh, we had a good time. It was fun. It was good. We went over to eastern Oklahoma, over by Lake Tenkiller, and had a place over there, and kids running everywhere. It was a blast. It was a blast. And one time they were all out in the lake, and I was just thinking, I could get out of here, and they couldn't catch me now. But no, it's all good. We had a good time, and missed being with you. Did get to watch the services online later Sunday afternoon. I tuned in and watched the Sunday morning service, pretty good and everything. I don't know who that guy was preaching, but he's not here tonight. So anyway, I'm I really am glad to see you. Let's see, Sid sent word, said Rick hopes to be out and among people again here in the next few days, doing a whole lot better and everything, and just recovering very well, but looking forward to getting fully. I think she said he goes back to the doctor on Friday and everything, and I'll be checking him out and everything. So sound like he's doing really well, and the communications I've had there. I might keep my friend Tommy Haynes that preaches at Central in your prayers. Tommy's in the hospital with infection. Just seemed like since he had his surgery, it just seemed like he can't completely get rid of that infection, but they've got him in. They believe what they've got him on should get him righted again. I talked to him this morning, and it seemed like he was doing much better. But keep him in prayers and all. Let's see, who else was I thinking about? It seemed like there was somebody else in my mind, but I should write these things down, shouldn't I? It would help. My wife would say, "Put it in your phone." I'd say, "Well, where's my phone?" No, I don't. Anyway, glad you're here. Let's get into the lesson this evening and get to going. I appreciate Max taking the class last Wednesday evening and all. And so, it's a step down to come back to this. But here we are. And this evening we continue in this. I might forget by the end of class. But, of course, next Wednesday evening is Vacation Bible School. So we won't be continuing this study next Wednesday evening. There's one at the end of the lesson sheets and so forth that says the next study, but that'll be 2 weeks away. And just keep in mind that our Vacation Bible School that was the other announcement I had, begins Monday evening. And if we have some adults here, we'll put on an adult class, spend a little time with the same subjects the kids are talking about. We probably won't jump up and down and clap our hands and sing Booster Booster, but we might study a little bit together. If you have an inclination or willing to come down Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday evening, it should be a good time. And it's always enjoyable to be here when the children are there, and Vacation Bible School is always an exciting time in that regard. But glad you're here this evening. We're going to be looking as we continue in our study of choices that we find in the book of Genesis, and that's where we draw from them and then try to think about how choices affect our own lives in that regard. This evening we're looking at the subject of the choice to see a new beginning. And that's a very New Testament thought and everything. But let's first have a word of prayer together, and then we'll go into this study this evening. So if you'd pray with me. Father and God, again, with so many blessings our way, we can't even begin to count all of them or lay them all before you, but we know every day our lives are greatly blessed by the things you put before us just to be here in this world that you made. And as we look around us and we see people we love so dearly, we're thankful for the time we can spend together. And Father, we pray that you will help us recognize how truly fortunate we are. Help us to continue to hold on to those things that are important in our lives and the blessings, but your word especially in our lives. May it be our guide and our strength And we pray that as we think about choices that we make in our lives, that you will be at the forefront of every choice that we make, and may the choices be things that please you, and may they bless and benefit each of our lives as well as the people around us. And it is in Jesus we do pray. Amen. All right, so here we go. Study number 9, the choice to see a new beginning. If you look at the passages up there briefly, Genesis 6 is the area, and if you're a student of the book of Genesis, you recognize tonight we are talking about Noah. And all. Anyway, so we'll look at the scriptures that I put on there. We can't read, we could, but we're not going to take time to read the entire story, but we'll look at a few of the verses there, 3 little sections of this, as we pick up in chapter 6 and verse 7, where it says, "So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And then we jump a little bit down, skip a few verses, go down to the 13th verse. Excuse me, where it says, "And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch." Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him, so he did. And that skipped several verses from verse 14 down through verse 22. But you get the gist of the story, and I think we recognize this, and we see the progression up to this point of humanity. We begin, with the creation in chapters 1 and 2 and Adam and Eve, and then we get into the sin that takes place that brings them out of the garden. And then chapter 4, we've got Cain and Abel, and then a progression down through the remainder of chapter 4 and chapter 5 of humanity, and we see them moving away from God. We see them moving away from God and their association and their relationship with God, moving in that direction until we come down to this point, and Noah is born, and he is the one who is to give them hope. There's an association there with his name, and that idea is there. But we look at that, and that's the person we relate to, and most any of us have heard some, if not the entirety of the story of Noah and the ark and all the animals and then the great flood and so forth. It is an interesting thing that most ancient cultures had a huge flood story in them. Many have known the Babylonian one, and it's an interesting one, but many of the ancient cultures have at least a reference to an ancient, large flood. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because some have doubted whether there really was such a flood. And of course, archaeologists can point to some things that lend in that direction, that there could have been a flood here, and the water being up so high, and been places where they've shown the remains of animals, the sea animals in these places. But anyway, that's where we come to at this point. And some of you have sat in Bible classes or taught Bible classes where you've been over this very story. But the centerpiece of our thought this evening has to do with how we come around to Noah makes a decision. We really don't think much about that, but Noah had to make a decision about this. So let's get into that and think about that. Let's begin with just looking at the story in a sense, because here in the 6th chapter we find God has made a decision about the world. This is an interesting decision. I don't know exactly how long the world has been in existence, or the created world with mankind on it, depending on your viewpoint of exactly how things work. If we go back to the garden in Genesis and we come to this point, how long exactly that's been. There's some that can give you a closer representation of that, but even if you add up the ages of the men and so forth, it's probably not going to be exact, but we're still in the early days of the world. if you might consider that, somewhat in the early days of the world at this point. And so here we've got this world, and it has, in the generations that bring up to this time, we've got a digression of faith in God. One of the things that we note was they made what we might consider unacceptable associations, marriages, intermarriages. And the picture there, some have wondered, are we talking about the sons of God marrying daughters of men? Are we talking about angels intermarrying with humans? No, more likely you're talking about worldly people intermarrying with people of faith. It's probably the more likely. Somebody can disagree with me if you want to. I like other people to be wrong. But probably that's the more likely situation here. Somebody asked me a question in a class like this one time and said, well, did God make other people? And my answer is, we don't have any record of it, but I can't say what God did beyond what we've got a record of. I don't know. But I can't say he didn't do something just because I don't have information on it. But regardless, we know that the lineage of Cain seems to have gone in a different direction. And of course, we've got the lineage of Seth over here. And this may have been more of the godly individuals, people continuing that progression of service to God, whereas the lineage of Cain may have been in a different direction. So whatever, we've got people in one direction, they're intermarrying, and the thing that generally happens. There is a pulling away. There is a dilution of faith that begins to take place. And so we find perhaps something like that taking place here. But there were unacceptable associations. What is it that we read about? Evil companions do what? Corrupt good morals is generally the way we say it, isn't it? They bring about a digression of faith or uprightness in people and all. And that's always a good thing to remember. But we see that taking place here early in the 6th chapter. And in fact, it is described in verse 5 that the wickedness among them was great. The evil among them was great. And that term evil is an interesting term that's thrown out there. And sometimes when we think about evil, we think about something that is harmful or hurtful to us in particular. You know, the black witch or something like that is evil. It's the one that gives... which was Sleeping Beauty, the poisoned apple to eat or something like that. That's evil. Well, I know that's make-believe I'm talking about. But I don't know exactly what comes to your mind when you're talking about evil. But generally the word can mean as little as just not doing God's way. That's what evil is. It is just the opposite of doing right by God is to do evil. Anything contrary to doing God's will would be classified as evil. Yes, sir. Okay. Very good. So anything that we'd consider evil is anything that doesn't conform. And so we've got evidently the vast portion of the world is that way, because you point out only Noah is the one that is associated with conforming to God's will at this point as a family leader, and the point that, and it seems at the point that Noah is instructed by God, he may not have had any children at that point, so and everything at that point, or at least none that remained with him or faithful. But we do note and add into that what God saw in humanity grieved him. One of the questions I didn't put in here later was, do you think God is grieved when he looks at the world today? It's just a thought. But we may say more about that later on. But it brought God to determine to destroy humanity. We see God at different times using one nation to destroy another nation, to obliterate them as much as possible. We see God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah and their behavior in that regard. But in this case, we're talking about he's basically everyone. Everyone on the earth. How many there are, I don't know. I've seen estimates and so forth, but that doesn't matter how many there really are at this point. It's everyone except Noah and his family in this regards. So this is a very devastating thing, and it's a determination by God in that regard. And we wonder, how in the world could God get to this point? Well, later, Noah is referred to as a preacher of righteousness, isn't he? Yeah, he's one who preached, in a sense, to people, maybe simply by his life and his actions, maybe calling people verbally and so forth to do that. But nonetheless, God at this point, and we can back up a little bit, because when God makes this determination, how long is it going to be? 120 years. Now that may seem like a long time to you and me, because most of us wouldn't be around for a 120-year span. Some of you, I think you've already been here that long. But no, most of us won't be around for a 120-year span, and probably none of us will. But we see that God says it's going to be that way in this case. Of course, many of the people in that time lived beyond that length of time, and we know Noah did, because at the time he goes into the ark, how old was he? 600 years old at the time he goes into the ark. And so if we give him about 100 years in the time from the time God calls him till the time that they go into the ark, he's still not exactly what we would consider a young man at that point. So that's all kind of beside the point, just kind of laying some groundwork with that. But what we find is God wants to destroy humanity. I hope that doesn't make us think ill of God, because we sometimes think about God, does God know humanity? Yeah. Did he know what humanity would be, what they would do? If God is omniscient, as we claim him to be, and I believe he is, why would a God make a world that was going to be like it is? But that is the very nature of God, to do that and give the opportunity there, I think. I don't know. We can debate and discuss that in another case, but nonetheless, that's what we find here. So he makes that determination. From there, we pick out Noah. And grace is extended to Noah. And I think it's important that we look at that idea of grace being extended to Noah. Notice how Noah is described. He is described, 3 words that I picked up, are 3 phrases. 2 of them are just words and 1 is a phrase. He is called just. What do we mean by just? Righteous or upright in what he does. It is, when we say just or justified, that's a carpentry word, meaning set upright, like it's supposed to be. And so he is just. He's also described as perfect. He and I had a lot in common. No scoffing, no belittling. Okay. But this means he's complete. This doesn't mean he's a flawless individual. You're exactly right when you say he's complete. He's a whole man. His whole of duty and service is wrapped up in this. When he says he's a perfect man, it doesn't mean he's flawless in what he does. Because, it's just that this is what he is. He is just. He's perfect. That would carry the idea of consistent and always what he is. And then walking and conducting himself with God. He said he walked with God. When I was a kid, you know how I pictured that? He's walking around down the area with God walking beside him all the time. That's not exactly what it means. I think there was a communication, a communion with God, yes. But when it says he walked with God, it basically means he walked in God's ways. And that's what you were saying a while ago. He was walking in and conforming to God's ways when it says he walked with God and so forth. More than the idea of they were walking side by side or something like that, physically speaking. It's more about his character and what he was doing when it says he conducted himself or walked with God. But let's think about that meaning of that word grace. The word grace. Now we can go to the Greek and we can go to charis, but this draws out of the ancient Hebrew. And I threw that in there. I don't know Hebrew. I don't know it up, down, backward, or forward. Doesn't make any difference. But looking at the Hebrew, you can see the word chan or can, which can also be translated as graciousness or kindness and favor in a subjective way, or in the objective case, be beauty. Basically, what I got out of this and looking at this was God granted something kind and generous to Noah. We may look at this and we may back up and we say, well, he was just, he was perfect, and he walked with God. Does that mean he deserved this? If he deserved it, then grace is not correct. And the way that is used here is not correct. It's not that he deserved it. Was he better than the rest of humanity? It appears so, yes. But that doesn't mean he deserved something special any more than, well, anyway, it wasn't about deserving, it was about God choosing. God chose him, and God gave to him. So grace typically means a gift. He was given a gift. It was gracious. It was knowledge of God's plan and the size of it that is tied into this. He accepted that. He used it. He participated in it. It was knowledge. God had a plan, and Noah accepted that. It included a means of escape for him. I don't know the mind of Noah any more than any of us can, except what we read here. But do we know why, the motivation specifically, why Noah was willing to do this? We could say because God told him to. Yes, I think that's at least part of it. But I think as he saw God's plan, he could also see it was a salvation for himself and his family. He could also see that there was an unfolding plan, and it was an adventure. That's what I said when I called this the choice to see a new beginning. Perhaps Noah was being associated with God, detested the things that went on around him and the communities or the people that were around him. I don't know how closely he lived and how close people were in proximity to one another fully, but we do recognize there was community of peoples in different places. So it was a means of getting out of this and not being burdened by that, not being tortured by the situations of people and their foreignness to God. And so grace was extended to Noah, and he grabbed hold of it. But as I didn't go there. I'm sorry, I got behind, didn't I? No, I didn't. That's right. But it's not according to my notes, is it? Did I miss something back there? Just a minute. No? Okay. I don't know what happened here. Somehow it's not on there. Anyway, there is a note, and I've got a note on here that grace included specific action on the part of Noah. Where'd that go? I don't know what I did with that. There it is. Yeah. There it is. Grace was extended to Noah. There we go. Note that the grace extended included specific action. There, I don't know why I got messed up. Maybe somebody else needs to press the button. It's probably your fault, Josh, isn't it? No? Okay. Anyway, well, you handed this to me, and I don't know what to do with it. Okay, very good. Back to this. Grace included very specific action on the part of Noah. As he accepts what God gives him, tells him, I'm giving you this gift, or with the gift, there is this. Notice he's given some very specific things, and you get down to verses 14 through 16, you find some very specific things. You're to go and build yourself an ark. Did Noah know how to build an ark before that? Wouldn't be any reason to think he did, no. I don't know what boats they had prior to this, or whether he was even near any water at this point, to speak of. But anyway, he tells him to go and build this ark. Evidently, there was an understanding. We probably don't have everything that God told him. There's probably a lot more communication that went on with this. Not like the old Bill Cosby thing, but the realization that he's saying, no, Lord, explain this to me. But within that, he's very specific about materials. What kind of wood is he to use? Gopher wood. Okay? How is it to be designed? He tells him the length and the width of it. Somebody said that became the basis for most ships built in proportion to that for generations in that regard. But the design of it, of upper and lower decks, of a covering over the top, of a window and a door. Now, I think we've often seen those pictures of that neat ark, and there's one sitting there on the shelf in my office, that neat ark with the nice sloped roof on the top of it. And we often think of that window, that nice little Dutch window you open up and stick in it. I don't have an idea. Some think that was a window all the way around. And boy, that'd have been nice. You had that many animals in there for about a year. You'd kind of want a big window in the place. And the door, what was it like? Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly. It could have been cigar box shaped. Realize this thing was not intended to be a seagoing vessel that was making its way from one place to another and splitting the waves and so forth. It was just intended to be a large floating thing. So the cigar box shape could have worked for it. I don't know. You can think about it how you will. But he gives him some of the dimensions of design, of its length, its width, of 300 cubits and 50 cubits, and the levels of it, the divisions that were inside, and the people who were involved, his family. That's the specifics that are given to Noah in this case. You and your sons and so forth in that regard. But when you look at it and the acceptance is there, what's going to be the chief requirement? It's trusting God. Trusting God. Did you ever get into a project and you just think, man, I'm tired of this project and I'd like to get out of it? I've gotten into some of those. I got rebuilding the patio cover on our house. A bunch of it got kind of messed up, and I was rebuilding a bunch of it. I do a little bit here, a little bit there. And this project has taken a lot longer than I intended for it to take. And sometimes I come in and I just think, I don't want to work on this thing anymore. You ever get to that point in any kind of project you're doing? Not necessarily carpentry project, but something like that. I think we all get there and think, man, I don't want to do this anymore. It's kind of like when we had kids. After a while, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. No, that's not true. Just wanted you to smile about that. Don't you know that Noah had to, over the span of time it took to build that thing, he had to think, man, I'm tired of going out there every morning and working on this thing. Maybe he didn't. But if he was like me, I think he surely would have. And I've had a lot of projects along the way that have been that way. Chief requirement was that trust in God that kept him motivated and moving forward. God is going to do this. Again, I think he probably communicated with God much throughout the time and so forth that this is going on. But he's made a choice and he's sticking with it. So when we think about it and the specifics of the choice and what all this involved, and that's why I give you that other stuff, I'm thinking there's a lot involved in this thing for him. And remember, with this is other people are gone. All there is his family. All there is left, Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives. That's it. So, he makes a choice. He makes a choice. And with that, there are all those serious implications, all the challenges associated with the choice that's made. And I don't know how it was, but can you imagine people looking and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Building that big old thing out there. What are you doing? So, well, God's going to flood the world. Yeah, sure. That's the way it's going to be. God's going to flood the world. I think there's a good chance, yes. Yes, and I think they had warning, and they had opportunity in the time of Noah, I think in particular. They had the opportunity to have changed their ways. And we know that God has at times said, I'm going to do this. But when people changed, he said, okay, I will relent in doing that at this point. I will do this because of your evil. But when they relented or repented, he changed in what he was going to do. Yes. Yes, he was going to destroy Israel, and Moses says, please don't do that. Let's work on this together, basically. Yeah. What? And Jonah, yes, and Jonah and so forth. And we talk about Nineveh, and he went there and preached, and then as Jonah says, I knew you'd do that. Back off on that. Anyway, so there we go. What does it say here? Got a note. Grace only saves when faith obeys. And I think that's pretty much what we're saying. Thank you, Sid. That's pretty much what we are saying here in regard to Noah. So Noah chose to do what God commanded, and we find very plainly he did exactly what God required of him, exactly what God commanded. He did it completely. So let's think about that for the next few moments then. Let's think about this and Noah and his choice. And remember, as you think about it, remember, this is not something easy. It's not just simply, Noah, follow me and everything will be all right. No, this is more like, Noah, I got a tough job for you to do. And so think about that. So where do we go with this? Number one, how did the world get into such a condition at the time of Noah? How did the world get to this point at the time of Noah? That only one man and his family are worthy of being saved. Okay. See, I think we need to see how bad things really were. You think there's a lot of bad in the world today? I think there is. You think the world is in the condition it was in the time of Noah? No, it's not. You know how I know? Look around you. We're here. You and me. We're right here. Aren't we? And aren't there people like us around? Aren't there good people out there? And I'm not, let's don't go with just people who agree with us and believe exactly. Aren't there a lot of fine, upright people who do believe in God around us as well? Yes. Yes. I think there are a lot of, now, I'm not trying to justify them in the eyes of God. Please understand what I'm saying. That's God's business, not mine. But you can look around and there are a lot of wonderful people, not just here, in a lot of places and around the world, and they love the gospel, they love the message, they love teaching it, they love being a participant with it, and so forth. How did the world get in such condition at the time of Noah? And I think the passage where it talks about the intermarriages there, I think that's where we get into it, when you allow yourself to be pulled into something that is contrary to what you know and believe to be true in God. It is detrimental, and it is detrimental to the generations that follow after you. It's tough enough when it's not. And when we look at the nature of humanity, what brought Adam and Eve to sin in the first place? Personal appeal. I mean, the thing that appealed to them. Oh, they wanted to be like God, and the fruit looked good, and so they disobey God, and there the direction goes from there. Yes, sir. That's a good point. When you've got these unbelievers and they build up a community, or they build up enough people, and then they kind of drag people that are hesitant, still want to cling to God, but they're dragged down with them. And if you read the history of Israel, you find that to be true in both Judah and Israel as you read through the Old Testament in that regard. So you see that happening, and in fact, if you read the history and the kings and so forth, sometimes you think things are on an upswing, everything looks really good, and the next thing you know, a king dies, his son takes over, his son's a lousy dude, and everything just goes downhill. Were there still some people that would have liked to have done right? Probably. And even when there was a truly righteous king, there were a lot of people thinking, let's go the other direction. So, okay, question 2. What key element was in Noah's life that brought the opportunity of grace from God to him? What was the key element in his life that brought the opportunity of grace from God to him? Why did God choose him? Okay, he was righteous. Any other thought? Just say he's righteous. Probably enough. But that it finishes with that idea that he walked with God. I think you're right on track, and all of that ties in his righteousness, his completeness. But he had a desire to be close to God. I think when you read like the 119th Psalm, that lengthy Psalm, David writes through there and he says, your word, your word, your word. Each section comes back to your word is important. Your word is important. It is that association with what God has for him that keeps him in line and keeps us together. You know, when we talk about reading the Bible, and trying to be consistent in reading the Bible on a regular daily basis and all. It's not just so that we can say, hey, I read the Bible, you know. But it is that association that draws you in and keeps you focused on God's Word. The same thing we would say about maybe church attendance. You know, a lot of people don't see church attendance as very important at all. But when you do, and that association, that continual participation helps keep you focused on where you're going and what you're doing. It is important. That's why Jesus would say, this do in remembrance of me. It keeps us focused on where we're going and why we're doing it. It becomes a very important thing in our lives. If you look back, and some of you have backgrounds that go back kind of like mine did, you know, we were there every time the door opened. We had to be because my dad was paid to be there. No, I think we would have been no matter what, in all seriousness. But every time the door was open, we were there. And you know, that just becomes a part of your life, and it ties you in. And I think the older you get, the more important you realize that is. And people make a lot of mistakes about thinking that it's not very important, that it's not important to bring your kids in and sit down, even if there's not a Bible class for them or something like that. It is something. So that idea of him walking in association with God, that commitment, I don't know, it just a thought that I was throwing in. Somebody might have a different thought. Y'all are awfully quiet this evening. Blue and I are carrying on a good conversation over here, but okay, seriously, back to this. Okay. Well, I don't think we need number 3 because I've just been waxing that elephant about that one there. What does it mean? And it states Noah walked with God. Yeah, I think he was consistently in association with God. I think we'd say he prayed in the morning, he prayed at noontime, he prayed at evening. Now, I think he was in communication with God. In a regular basis, I think that was on his heart and his mind. Realize he didn't have a Bible to pick up and read. It was that commitment to what he knew and understood of God and what God communicated with him. That's what he held on to. Okay. But how would, and that's number 4, man, I've already kind of touched on this. How would a walk with God be different today from the way it was in the time of Noah? How would a walk today differ from the time of Noah? One, you're not going to build an ark, that's for sure. Okay, we've got Christ. We've got his life and his example and his drawing and the grace that's in him and so forth. We got the Bible to read. We've got fellow Christians around us, something he didn't have. You know, that's what the writer of Hebrews tells us. You know, you've got all these examples and all these people, and you've got all these encouragers and you know people that you could pick up a phone right now and you could say, I need you. And I'm struggling with this. Okay. Better move on from that. So we can recognize there would be some differences, but it would be those technical differences in a way. but it would still have those similar things. Compared to our times, compare our times to the time of Noah. How are our times today different? Well, we touched on this a while ago. How are our times different than they were in the time of Noah? Do what? Okay. All right, there are a lot of cultural differences and technological and so forth differences in that regard to that. I also want us to emphasize, and I was saying, I also want us to recognize we have much more support. Even in the worldliness of our society, there are still a lot of people who encourage the idea of Christian living. A lot of associations, a lot of groups and so forth that still encourage that. I know we see the other side as well, and those who would like to do away with all religion and so forth, but there is still a lot of encouragement to that even today. Okay, it's humanity that changes, but God is consistent and unchanging in that regard. I better hurry. We're not going to get done with this, are we? Number 6, question number 6. Oh, well, I said, how are they similar? How are times similar? It's still a personal determination to walk with God or not walk with God. It's the individual. It always has been. It always will be. It's not a group mentality. It is you make your choice on what you're going to be and what you're going to do. I used to think I could really push people and force people into it. No, it's up to you. You make your choice. I'll be there with you, but you make your choice. Okay, if God were to announce that he was going to, again, bring destruction to humanity, what method would he use? Okay, and the New Testament points to fire is the picture that is there in the New Testament in that regard. But we know it won't be a flood. Isn't that correct? That's right. There's that covenant. You've seen those rainbows, haven't you? Okay, very good. But it wouldn't be a flood. What method would he use? If you were God, now that's a stretch, isn't it? What method would you use if you wanted to destroy the world? Just watch them battle it out, okay? Just let them go. Let them have at one another and push it around. You know, that's good. Yeah, I don't know, Debbie. That might be it. Just let it go and go at it. Let's suppose God were saying to us, "I'm going to destroy the world." How do you think we would respond? That's a good point. Do I think people are different now than they were then? I think we would probably respond a whole lot like the people of Noah's time did. I think generally speaking, I think even we would struggle with something like that. Okay. When we load it up and we look at it, we still struggle with the idea that God will do what he says he's going to do. We find that and the idea of knowing where we're going, 1 John 5, that I know that he has given me life. I know that I have life in him. We tell ourselves that, but it is always something of a challenge. If the Lord said, I'm going to end the world by the end of this week, how would we accept that? Oh, that's just foolish. It's not going to happen. We've heard too many people over the years that have calculated and figured exactly when the world was going to end and so forth, to the point that we begin to think, I don't think it's ever going to end. You think about how you think about it. And I think it's a good thing, a good exercise for us, because I think about when I was a little boy and I used to hear some of those preachers talk about the end of the world. I'd sit there and think, Ben, I hope I'm sitting here in church when the world ends, you know. I want to be doing the right thing, getting it squared away. But how would we respond? I think you're right. I think you're right. We probably would be a whole lot like they were in that time. Hopefully we'd be a little bit like Noah. Well, there's a second bell. Let's look at the final question just briefly. What are our most applicable lessons from Noah? What do we most learn from Noah? Trust in God, do what he says, and things turn out well for you. That's a pretty good lesson, isn't it? And that God will often do the unbelievable. Noah made a choice. He's willing to go with God and start a whole new beginning. Yeah, Danny? Okay. We need to recognize that only... You're right. We cannot save the world. We don't have the power within ourselves, do we, to do that? No. Yeah, very good. You had something else. Oh, that's a good thought. Yeah, he's the second innovation, the second father of humanity, that all humanity stems from Noah downwards. Very good point. He's the second in that regard. All right, well, 2 weeks from this evening, we'll look at, again, a choice, and the choice to go into the unknown, Genesis 12. If you recognize that, you recognize we're probably going to talk about Abraham. Okay. All right, well, I want to thank you very much for being here this evening. Next week, of course, we'll be in Vacation Bible School, and look forward to that as well. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of the class this evening.